Welcome back to the channel. Have you ever fallen in love with elements from 2 or 3 crochet patterns and wished you could combine them into something completely unique? Well, that's exactly what I did to get this summer top. I took the simple flattering shape from one pattern, I paired it with the beautiful lace edging from another, and then ended up adding in a third to create a lightweight, one-of-a-kind crochet top that uses up my stash from my summer sweater video. So in today's video, I'll show you exactly how I combined the two designs, where I had to make adjustments, and what you need to know if you want to mix and match patterns for your own custom creations. So whether you're looking to use up yarn from your stash or put your own creative spin on existing patterns, let's look at how to create this summer crochet top. So let's look at the patterns and the elements that inspired me. The first element comes from a pattern in a library book called Rustic Modern Crochet. And they had a shawl with an element I loved, and that had me Googling the designer and looking at a range of beautiful things she does in linen. Unfortunately, I tried following the pattern written instructions, and she also has the charts, and I could not for the life of me figure out how to create this lace trim. And I will say I'm a left-handed crocheter having to flip and translate right-handed patterns. But I asked for some other advice and we just couldn't figure it out. So I was freehanding it from basically looking at mirror images and guessing at what her kind of pattern instructions were. Got a bit frustrated and I set this aside because I just couldn't quite figure it out. But let's talk about the second pattern, which is this layering tank from Heart Hook Home. And very simple bottom-up construction. And what got me interested was looking at tank tops or shirts that went from more of a solid construction from just a functional practicality down to something that you could make quite lacy at the bottom. And so inspired by this tank, I'm trying to take this image, thinking about more mesh opening at the lower half of the tank, having it transition differently, trying to figure out in my head if I can combine that with this interesting lace on the bottom and if that will actually look okay. So then I reverse engineer an image search on the first pattern to see if there's a video, and it pops up with this pattern from Drops. So there's a link in the description for this one as well. I'm probably going to say the name of this pattern incorrectly. It was the Ipanema top that was from 1982. And they're calling it the clover lace trim on it. And they're using a triple crochet, so it's slightly different. But it is helpful because there is an instructional video and it's very easy to watch the right-handed video and figure out exactly how to make their trim. Now, I didn't do it exactly as the pattern called because I'd already started and was thinking about more random haphazard placement of the trim. But again, you can easily find the information in order to combine any of the elements that I'm putting together here. So I've got an interesting trim lace detail on the bottom. I've got a transition from more mesh stitches down to less mesh stitches down to completely double crochet for coverage at the top. And I'm kind of randomly now playing around with my stash in order to create something that's a bit unique. So on the bottom, I end up with about 5 mesh stitches. I'm taking it down to 1. And again, before I walk through all of the adjustments I've had to make looking at these 3 different patterns, please, if you need more information or you're missing something I didn't touch upon, check out this Ravelry page. It's where I keep all the links to the patterns, the videos, and the notes that I've made as I go along. So again, the tank top for the Heart Hook Home pattern is a cotton and she's using a 3mm hook. I wanted larger mesh stitches and openings and I've transitioned to a 4 hook. Now, when I'm doing the lace across the bottom and I'm just holding it around my hips to place it, and again, recognizing I'm using a much more stretchier yarn than a cotton would be, I end up with about 84 mesh stitches or 168 double crochet stitches around. Her medium pattern is 190 stitches around. So we know that we have, although the gauges aren't significantly different, a much different stitch count in order to get the width that I want. So what I do when I'm combining any combination of patterns, in fact, when I just do a single pattern, I don't trust the stitch count, I measure. So know your own measurements, know the width that you prefer, take out a tank top that you love and wear, and always have that in the back of your mind as you're evaluating stitch counts. So I cannot make this to 190 stitches and follow the pattern exactly. It would be ginormous. I'm going to go with the 168 stitches that I measured as I was working on the trim. It fits perfectly and placed it where I want it around my waist. So other than that though, I am going to look at the pattern and look at the number of rows because again, my stitch row count and gauge is close. And I'm going to follow, the pattern as she works it up from the bottom up. The only difference is I'm kind of ignoring the stitches that she's using. She's alternating double crochet rows with mesh stitch rows. I'm doing way more mesh stitch rows. So just keeping in mind, again, the measurements that I need to keep a hold of. I end up doing close to the same number of rows as on the pattern, but her stitch count and rows are 190 at the hem and 190 at the bust, which is a very boxy shape. I'm more pear-shaped and I tend to alter patterns by decreasing at the waist just to make it a bit more flattering. On this, I know just trying on the first, 5-6 inches of this at the bottom is going to be way too large at the top in order for me to have a tank that fits properly. So not only am I sort of just using the pattern more as a guide and following up from a lot of mesh stitches. In the middle here, I'm more reflecting her pattern, which is 1 row double crochet, 1 row mesh stitch, and I'm making sure as I look at my measurements, I'm converting as she does to straight up double crochet where I want coverage over the bust line. What I'm also doing here, and it's not really easy to see on this picture, is I have taken out 10 stitches to decrease as I actually work those double crochets up to the underarm for the bust coverage. So that's going to actually give me a much nicer fit. Otherwise, I would have big gaping underarms with way too much fabric on them. So I'm just decreasing. If you are the opposite of me and you have a double D size bra, you would actually be doing the opposite, and you could easily, as you're looking at these double crochet stitches, be increasing to give you a much larger bust size and flare it out. So easy again for even beginners to make simple adjustments to any basic pattern in order to get a much more flattering fit. So I've just done, again, the same 168 stitches. I'm working them in the round back and forth. I'm just, playing around as my own imagination kicks in, and I'm staggering the number of mesh rows down to get to her single crochet alternating with double crochet mesh. And then as we get towards the chest, I'm switching it up to double crochet to give me that coverage. So not a large number of adjustments, but even those small adjustments with the decreases are going to make a big difference on fit. Even if I was following the pattern using exactly the same cotton yarn, I'd be making those fit adjustments knowing that I'm smaller and going to have big, kind of underarm gaps with too much fabric if I just did 190 stitches as the pattern called for all the way to the top. So those are really easy basic adjustments, and we're creating the lower half of the tank. And again, you can easily measure exactly where you want your bust decreases or increases to fit based on exactly, how long your torso is. So if you have a shorter torso, less rows. If you have a longer torso, you can add more rows. That makes a very easy lower half of the top. But because I now am working with 168 stitches instead of the pattern calls for 190 stitches in the round, I also know I'm going to have to do some adjustments as I think about where to do the placement of the straps and the upper part. So we're not throwing away the patterns or ignoring them and freestyling. I'm still using them as a guide. She's very clear on the number of rows. I'm just knowing I'm going to go with my measurements more so than the actual stitch count to make sure that I get the perfect fit. As we transition to the upper part here, she is suggesting that we slip stitch for a size medium 10 stitches to create that arm opening. Now, arm openings are pretty standard across all patterns. So I'm pretty comfortable thinking that that's a pretty good recommendation for even the size of my arm opening. And I'm just going to think about doing her 10 slip stitches. Again, slip stitches are going to tighten up this very stretchy yarn as well and help making sure I don't have too much bulk or too much excess fabric at the top. Then she creates a shorter row of stitches by leaving the last 10 stitches unworked in order to create that front upper panel. It's a simple beginner friendly pattern because it's the same on the front as the back. So you're doing exactly the same on both sizes. So she in the pattern calls for 4 rows of this upper section to take you from this lower body and transition you up to the upper arm. And that's exactly what I do. So now we just have to think about placing the straps, which were so key to why I loved the Heart Home version of a tank pattern. So if I work in to create the upper panel, I've now, you can see, created these armholes. And again, I went from 84 stitches at the front down to 72. So that 84 is my 168, and I've decreased it down to 72 to get it to fit well. I've done the slip stitch of 10 to make my arm opening, and now I'm going to do her 4 rows of this shorter panel in order to take me up to the front and then give me the space to anchor the 2 straps. In the pattern, she works both straps on either side of this higher panel. And so that is making me think that even though my stitch count is off slightly, so again, she has 16 stitches under the arm, I'm going to do 10. And I'm going to have less straps. Her straps go from 19 stitches down to 9. And so I'm not going to have enough space. If I did 19 stitches, I wouldn't have any gap in the opening for my neck at all, because I only have 50 stitches across this upper panel. So in order to calculate, test it, just make sure it's going to fit you perfectly, I just measured across the upper panel, roughly guessed at how wide the actual straps would be from another tank top that I love to wear, and I measured that I wanted to start the base of the strap where I put the green marker, so that's 12 stitches. And I do want my stitches to be 8 stitches wide, so again, I'm just going to reduce from 12 to 8 instead. The pattern called for reducing from 19 to 9. But that is working out perfectly. It gives me a very similar look to the pattern. The placement of these straps is perfectly situated. I measured and tried it on to make sure. And so you're just easily following her instructions for how many rows to do for her stitches and, how many rows to do for her straps in order to make them the right length. Once you're happy with the length, because she talks about, again, if you have a longer torso or need to adjust that length, you can just add more rows. You simply attach the two straps together and then finish off the piece with a lovely slip stitch. So again, some minor adjustments. I used the patterns as a guide. I reinforced any decision by making sure I knew my own size and the measurement, and I was using inches more than stitch counts, but getting the exact same result for a great summer tank top. So easy to, again, look at those 3 different patterns, combined elements from each, use them as a guide, refer to the sizes I know, and make a perfect summer top. Here it is before I blocked it, and here again a finished look after it was blocked. So let me know what you think, and I look forward to hearing what tank top patterns you want to experiment with next.